Now, at this point in our program, I am filled with excitement, and I share in everyone's anticipation to hear from our keynote speaker. When we set out to plan today's conference, we thought, whom could we invite to share and celebrate in all of our efforts of connecting people and community? Who would embrace the stories of friendship and value person-centered strategies to build community that encompasses the very fabric of this work? Beth Mount was our North Star in our search for our keynote, and we are overjoyed to have her presence and wisdom with us in our time together today. Beth Mount has worked for more than 40 years toward the ideal that every person with a disability can be a valued member of community life. Beth is regarded as the international expert in the creative art of person-centered planning. Throughout the course of her professional and personal life, Beth has been deeply involved in strengthening community and building capacity for inclusion through her art, creativity, and leadership. It is with great pleasure we welcome Beth Mount.
Well, I can't thank you enough for having me in this conversation and reflection this morning. Just being a part of preparing for this has given me the opportunity to listen in on so many of your stories. And I would like to use my keynote time to just simply be a segue between the promise of relationship building and the potential for belonging and real connection that is the one factor that changes the heart and opens the heart in ways that almost nothing else we invest in does. And as I begin this talk, I want to just say, Elin, I'm looking at you. You're on my screen. And I can't say enough about the power of the collective in the state of Massachusetts. And there are many of you who have been critical players and actors way beyond the 10 years that this project, that this celebration lifts up. But the leadership, the role of leadership in these initiatives, both at the deputy director level and also Leo at the level of a statewide organization, there is nothing like this, to my awareness, in the world. There is no other example of leaders putting relationship building at the center of all the policy. Now, I know, Elin, it wasn't all the policy, but much of the policy. And Leo, I know it's not all that the ARC is up to, but whatever all your other competing commitments have been, you have kept this at the center of people's awareness and attention, and you have found even small, sometimes big ways to cultivate and fertilize and underwrite the passion of the people, many who are in this call today, to just keep on keeping on, right? And a big part of why we can celebrate the richness of these relationships and what's happening in Massachusetts is because of this collective cultivation, this collective intention to make and keep the heart of the work connecting people in love, right? In care and concern and qualities that we will never be able to measure in spite of how good our research tools are, right? These are the unspoken aspects of what we do, what you've done. And I will say beyond a shadow of a doubt, having listened to the videos, read your stories, that it is this energy, it is the qualities that you've cultivated that are part of a renewal of our communities, a part of a renewal of society, if you will. And now, as Leo said, now more than ever, this is what we need. So I hope you will use this time to reflect and to notice where you feel the power to keep going, to act, to take the next step, and also where you hear practices that you know have been of real value, of real that really make a difference. Because this work, I don't know of another group of people, another collective like this, that has invested in and curated the practices that are now part of what you engage in together. And so I hope this is just a transition from the last 40 years, the last 10 years, and the next 10 years, and the next 40 years of keeping this important work alive. So, that said, I did want to share a little bit more about some of the things that have made an impression on me as I've listened to your stories and studied the power of your work. Is that showing up for people? Can you see that okay? All right, great. So yes, we're celebrating connections, and I think it's very powerful that this image of a tree, right, with these hands reaching out, this was the logo for this initiative. And when we listen to the stories that you've curated, there are about 50 of them in both the handbooks and the manuals that Leo mentioned, and also the videos, which you'll have a chance to listen to a number of them today. Each one is more delicious than the other, right? They are such a treasure trove of power, of just immense power between people. And it's the kind of power that we can only feel and see and sense through a story and through listening to the people who are bringing these stories alive. And what we become aware of as clearly as ever, and I know we'll start with this shortly, Jonathan is in this group, and Joy. Jonathan and Joy's relationship is 30 years, right? Part of the power of many of these stories is these are not just outcome stories, right? These are long lasting relationships that have been cultivated with care and concern and attention. And we have so much to learn from that. So we are listening for both the power of these stories, what touches us, and also what are the practices that you have cultivated. And one thing that I am really impressed with in this group in general is I appreciate how much you all will set off on a certain direction, but because of your practice of reflection, you'll let something go, right? Because it's not really working. And so that's been hugely important. You've cultivated these practices and you're taking them to a whole nother level. And so this time together, these 2 hours, give us a chance to reflect upon the power and the practice of relationship building throughout Massachusetts and beyond. And I say beyond because I know in my experience working throughout America and really in the world, I would love nothing more than to collect up the richness of this initiative and and have this be known across all of these service environments. Because honestly, there's so many places that talk about relationship building. It's all over the place, right? But there's very little real power, real practice, and real investment in bringing these possibilities to life. And so I look forward to what emerges from today and how you continue. So we've already mentioned, and it's very important to say, that this is a time of real challenge. And this is a symbol, actually, it comes to me from Jack Yates. Jack, I appreciate this so much. You helped me see that Corona had more meaning than just the coronavirus. It is this fine light that continues to shine in an eclipse, that even in this darkest moment, when it seems that all light is maybe faded or hiding from us, we see this light, we can find this light. And in many ways, one of the things that's very significant about this initiative is that that this period of time with the virus has actually heightened what we know is working, right? So you all have watched a lot of things fall apart, like activities and things that were gave us a sense that people were included, but actually didn't necessarily hold up when the going got as tough and the darkness became as challenging as it's been for us all. And so you will have a chance to hear really wonderful stories of things that people have done during the corona time, right? That have been that are incredibly uplifting. And it reminds us also of the power of the one-to-one relationship, the heart-to-heart relationship that has sustained people and thrived during this time. It's important, of course, to say that right now there are many reasons to feel and connect to this sense of death, right? It's the coronavirus. We've lost 1 million people. Gun violence is just tearing us up inside, tearing our communities, our schools, our hearts apart. There is, of course, the ongoing racial injustice and income inequality, the war in Ukraine, environmental disaster, climate change. There's so many reasons that darkness can feel more powerful than what you're doing here. And yet, this is what you're doing here. You're saying, what is my story? What is my part? And how do I make a difference in the face of what can feel so overwhelming? And I really treasure this quote by Joan Halifax, because it just reminds me, as I listen to your stories, I felt like each one of these stories is its own light. She reminds us that each of us has to shine a light into our own corner, be it a small corner or a large one. We cannot be driven mad by suffering. We have to do whatever we can to transform our fear and sadness over our lack of agency. We have to do whatever we can to sow the seeds of peace in our world. And so we turn toward love and wisdom, hoping that we can shine some light into our small corners, and perhaps others might join us in their way. And so each of your stories is one of these lights. And together, I have been reminded of the great teaching and the great gifts of Judith Snow, who some of you may have known during her lifetime, and others, whether you realize it or not, you're walking in her legacy. This is a photograph of Judith and one of her friends, Diamond Harges, at the Toronto Summer Institute. Judith is the originator of Circles of Support, originally the Joshua Committee, when she brought people together to support her to move out of a nursing home. And Judith, there are so many great gifts that Judith brought us into the world before her passing in 2015. But I love this picture in particular because Judith called us forth to see the gift in every single person, right? Leo was making this point. As you move forward, you do not want to leave anyone out of the possibility of a true friendship, the possibility of a real relationship. And Diamond, Judith's friend here, is a great artist of social change, working with the principles of asset-based community development, which is just a kind of fancy word for what you've been practicing, which is finding the places, finding the spaces, finding the friends, finding the people where gifts are needed and gifts can be strengthened and lifted up. And so the two of them together, I feel like they kind of hold this mask that they're holding is an art effort that they made to support people to make a symbol of their highest potential. And what they both have to remind us of is that one cannot live into a highest potential without both finding the gift, recognizing and valuing the gifts of every person, and finding the place and the people who support and strengthen the gift. And here we have this lovely circle that Judith brought into our world and into our planet as an image of so much of the work that you all are doing. A reminder that the highest potential is strengthened and emerges as we build relationships and support people to live into valued social roles. And so Judith reminds us that anything that creates an opportunity for people to listen in and appreciate the gifts of one other person is that's the power of gifts. And if we learn to listen to gifts, we discover them. And so a hugely important element of this initiative over time is the capacity that you've developed together to listen to gifts, to discover them together. And Judith's call to us is that meaningful interactions that are the result of this work become the connective tissue of a healthy society. That this is not just for disabled people, this is for everyone. That this is, as Leo said, this is central to the quality of life of all of us. And yet, what is it that we find and where do we find our place in building and strengthening both the gift and also the belief, the power that our work is sustaining and strengthening a world that wants to be born in our communities. And so this is another one of Judith's teachings. Sustained, vibrant relationship demands that the person with a disability be viewed with a different vision and be listened to with a different ear. I think of that as the eyes of the heart. So as you listen to each of these stories, listen with the eyes of the heart. Foremost of these alternative possibilities is to see and hear the person as a welcome traveler. We must see our life journey as one of transforming human suffering by creating the supportive relationships we all need to sustain life and to celebrate together life's joys, victories, and surprises. And so what we have a chance to understand in the state of Massachusetts is what has it looked like, and Leo has already talked about this, and I've already mentioned the power of Elin Howe and other, and so many of you who've been a part of cultivating collective action, that we cannot make relationships happen, right? We are more like gardeners. We are more like artists and healers and fabricators, stitchers. We give ourselves through collective action. That's the power and the practice. But our organizations and people in authority can have a great influence on our capacity to show up and give our attention and our awareness to these important possibilities. And I want to just mention, Elin, I'm reminded going back here probably 7 or 8 years ago when you came to a direct support conference at Seacrest, and some direct support workers had the courage to challenge you in a public meeting to say, I hear you saying develop relationships, but honestly, where I work, there are so many things that we're up against that are in the way of developing relationships. Everything from fingerprinting people to who knows what else. So many things that direct support staff felt like were stopping them from taking the next step. And this is just an example of powerful leadership, collective action, and listening. So, as the state director, Elin stopped everything, turned on a dime, went to lunch with that group of people and said, "Tell me more." And out of that conversation came creating our Commonwealth, a 3-year initiative, right? That was funded well. Larry Tumino had a part, so many of you. But that was an example of saying, all right, this is not just about using the words and sounding good at the podium, but really turning on a dime and saying, how do we give more energy and attention toward these ideals, because we really do believe in them. And so on this note, I'm going to turn to ask you now, as you listen to these stories, to explore what is your part. And I am offering a window to you for listening. And Katie is going to, after today, we're going to collect the observations, the reflections, and the wisdom that you notice as you listen to these stories. I've been sharing some of what I've noticed and what I've become aware of. And I'm going to even invite you, by the way, to draw a window on your page, just 4 squares, and see as things arrive for you, insight, a sense of what more is possible, a practice. Just give yourself a place to write it down, because it may be really important that you're noticing that more clearly right now. So here are just a few that I've noticed in listening to your stories, and we'll have a chance to hear a lot more about this. One of the powers of the work include the ways that people with disabilities are showing up in this conversation. That we've got the Friends Matter group and the advocates standing strong that are taking an important leadership role. Families, of course, families have always been at the forefront of holding their families and the cares and concerns of individuals together. But what's so important about this initiative is that there are countless other associations that are also providing additional strength and power and support to both people with disabilities and families. And so that is everything from citizen advocacy, which has been thriving, well, sometimes maybe struggling, but alive in Massachusetts for more than 35 years. Best Buddies, the YMCA, you'll hear more about all of these. And of course, provider organizations. And one of the observations, one of the findings for me is noticing how all of these stakeholders are being supported through your networks to help each other, to reach across what is often a separated place of trying to make a difference, to come together, to do what you can, to strengthen doing what you can with what you have, where you are, but to also ask for help, to reach and look beyond your own group, your own location, your own situation, to ask for help. We're going to hear some themes in practice. They include, but I hope you will notice even more in a more detailed, nuanced way. Well, what is it about that person-centered planning that made the difference? There's a hugely important body of work that you've developed here around the invitation. And I know I wrote down, gee, I want to know more about the invitation to engagement. This is something that you all have really worked to cultivate, right? I think that's vitally important. And we'll hear a lot more about that. There are wonderful examples of creative collective action, whether it's at the level of a family You're going to hear about a doggy daycare coming out of nowhere. That's what I call creative collective action, but also the YMCA finding a way to make a difference and change the way they do their work across the state. And finally, there are the efforts that organizations are making to change and to find more space for doing this work. And so I will finish now. As you listen to these stories, I want to invite you to notice what touches you. Where do you feel your growing edge? What wants to grow with your help? And what is a seed of the future that you want to cultivate? And we'll come back to these questions toward the end of our time together.
Thank you so much, Beth. You have provided us such thoughtful insight as we start to move forward into deeply exploring some of those themes that you discussed by sharing stories of our work.